It's trying and
There we
live.
go.
Hey.
Hey.
God. So it was funny too because I was watching the live. Oh, hi, welcome everybody to Emergency Encounters. And I was watching the live stream today of the Lori Vallow um,
Oh,
verdict, right? And everything crashed on them too. So I think there's
really?
just some weird glitchy stuff going on with technology the last few days. I don't know. Anyway, I'm Colleen, and I'm with Emergency Encounters, and I am here with Cami.
Hello, and we're here with Mad Max.
Hiya, and the beautiful and multi-talented. Go ahead.
Oh,
Mud
Mud Lover.
Lover.
Hey.
Yes, we have a doozy of a show for you tonight. We're going to talk about the satanic panic of it basically, if you guys out there in the interwebs remember this, if you were alive during the show, which is really weird to say. Like, were you even alive during all of this? I remember it, and it really started kind of it took hold in our country anyway. I think this happened elsewhere, but in America, this took hold in the 1970s. And I think this was the era of, remember the song Dawn of, it was the Age of Aquarius, and
Oh, yeah.
all of these movements came out. Christianity was kind of taken a hit because people weren't going to church as much. And so you had a lot of new age things happening, and you had like Wicca happening, you had cult movements happening, right? Jim Jones in Guyana. You had a lot of this stuff going on in the 70s, and a lot of people were pointing it to the lack of Christianity. So they attributed it to the rise of the satanic movement. And there were actually people like Geraldo Rivera, whose real name is Jerry Rivers. That always torqued me. Like, really, just say your name, right? But
Oh, my
anyway,
God.
he believed firmly that this was going to like take hold and like do in all of our teenagers. I mean, he was just touting all of this fear. And when you have news stations out there, we didn't have the internet, right? So we just had news stations, and they say stuff like that, and there's no way to research to counter it. It's fearful. People get fearful. Look what happened during COVID, right?
Yeah.
People were panicked because everything that you saw was about panic. So that's kind of where it started. There were a lot of cult movements. Then you had the Manson family murders, right? That was part of this era. And that was terrifying for people to think that you had a group of people that would go out and act like this and do these horrible deeds. That was part of this whole satanic panic thing. I have a lot more stuff that I can talk about, but I kind of wanted to get into what you guys researched on this. Who wants to go first? We're thinking Cami?
Yeah, I can start with. Do you want me to do both of mine
Yeah.
right now? Okay.
Sure.
So I was going to talk briefly about the West Memphis 3 case, and then also just kind of how the satanic panic influenced pop culture a little bit. So as we kind of know, the satanic panic ended up being like a mass cultural delusion that ended up just taking over the nation for a period of time between the 80s and 90s. And people genuinely believed that there was like this underground network of Satan worshippers who were committing all these horrific crimes like ritual abuse, sacrifices, and murder. Of course, there's no credible evidence of any of this. But just like Colleen was saying, the fear was there and it was leading the movement. We had everything being examined from backwards rock lyrics to clothes that you wore, books that were on the shelves. And I think that one of the most prolific and probably the most tragic byproduct of this whole panic was the West Memphis Three. So back in 1993, we had three 8-year-old boys, Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers, who were found brutally murdered in West Memphis, Arkansas. The town it's a pretty small town, so very religious, very conservative. And obviously they were pretty rattled. They put a lot of pressure on law enforcement to try to figure out who could have done this. So instead of having any hard evidence or proof of anyone who could have done this or finding real suspects, they actually honed in on a couple of teenage boys. So we had Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly Jr. Investigators tend to hone in on these boys because they were seen as misfits in the town. They were poor, specifically Damian Eccles. He tended to grow up in some pretty rough conditions. They all were into heavy metal. Damian, especially, he liked Wicca as a religion. He wore black, loved Stephen King, kind of anything that was a little off kilter back then.
Mm-hmm.
So he definitely had a bullseye on his back. Then we had Jesse. Jesse has a pretty low IQ. He didn't quite understand what was going on. And so when investigators pulled him in to talk to him kind of about all their suspicions of the three of them, he ended up being interrogated for hours. So police really took advantage of his low IQ, and he eventually gave them a forced confession. It shows that the confession actually didn't match any of the facts of the crime that the police did have, but they still ran with it. And there was no physical evidence at all linking any of them to the murder. So then in 1994, Damian Eccles was sentenced to death, and Jason Baldwin and Jesse Miskelly, they got life sentences. Shortly after their sentences, HBO released a documentary called Paradise Lost, which I highly recommend. I believe there's 3 movies of them. So it covers the murder, the trial, and then their lives in prison. This documentary ended up getting the attention of celebrities like Eddie Vedder and Johnny Depp, who also helped lead the cause to kind of point out all the injustices that happened and how they didn't really get any due process. They ended up being victims in this whole thing as well. 18 years later, the 3 of them took an Alfred plea, which basically says that the state has enough evidence on me to say that I'm guilty, but I'm going to, I guess, keep my innocence a little bit. And they were released. So Damian today, he spends a lot of his time talking about what happened in prison, the effects of being in there as a teenager and coming out 18 years later, how he missed his entire life. And he's been trying to force the state of Arkansas to actually find the person who did this. He keeps putting in motions for DNA, to get the evidence, to review it again, to reopen the case, and they continuously deny him. So he is trying really hard to bring some justice to the families, and that's where they're at today.
I don't think there's anything worse than being in prison for something you didn't do.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that.
I know Damian, I've listened to quite a few episodes where he's been on quite a few podcasts and done some interviews. And he said it was just horrific. He actually lost his eyesight because he was held in solitary confinement constantly. So yeah, he has a lot of kind of mental health issues now and health issues overall. So
it's terrible. That's absolutely terrible and tragic. What was the other story that you had, Kim?
Yeah, so I was actually, this is, instead of being kind of sad and dark, I was going to talk about pop culture a little bit, because it is kind of interesting how that, like, really affected the whole satanic panic. So back then, of course, we had, like, metal bands coming out, Judas Priest, Ozzy Osbourne, anybody else, you can name them, and they tend to be the scapegoats. So because their music had a lot of dark imagery, aggressive sounds, and sometimes occult references, They ended up being blamed for enticing violence and corrupting our nation's youth. And I believe that even KISS, they had like Moms Against KISS. So there's that whole thing too because of the whole music thing. Role-playing games. I found this one interesting. Dungeons and Dragons. They were considered to be a gateway to Satan because it encouraged demonic worship, witchcraft, and suicide. And then I know you touched on this briefly, but we also had a bunch of daytime talk shows like Devil Worship Exposing Satan's Underground with Geraldo Rivera, where he would begin to claim that we have dozens of thousands of underground satanic cults. And Oprah and Sally Jesse, they would have, I guess you call them survivors of satanic ritual abuse on their shows, and they would fuel the fire as well.
You know, there's certainly people that have used it as the, what would you say, the impetus for doing nefarious deeds, but there's not been really proof that it was satanic worship that actually made the person do the nefarious deed, right?
Yeah.
They've said that the reason why they did, like, for example, a murder somewhere was because of what they were doing, but there was never any proof. And the cops, I know my mom was a cop during all of this, right? And it would drive her crazy because she's like, it would come across the teletype and all this information. And she's like, it's people just doing bad things. That's kind of what it boiled down to. And maybe there's a little bit of that out there. But what do you think, Bad Max?
You know, I think that like Cami said, it's a scapegoat, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could take this stuff and put it all in the bucket. Oh, let's just put it in this bucket. It's this. It's you know, it's sacrificial. It's this. It's that. Unfortunately, like Cami spoke about, you know, the West Memphis 3, the one kid had a very low IQ, and I'll bet you money that this poor kid not only he didn't understand what was going on, like Cami said, but he probably relished everybody checking him out. Finally, I've arrived. I'm that guy. You know, I'm from a very small town. And everybody knew everybody. And at this time, you know, all you had to do was plant the seed. You know, you had, you know, telephone and telegraph and tell my mom. And my mom knew everybody. You know, you called somebody, or you went out and talked to your neighbor at the fence, you know, and that's how this stuff, it got ramped up. And it was really easy to, like Cami said, target certain people. You know, we had a guy, and I think he's passed away, but I'm not going to say what his name was. He was a pretty good dude, but he walked around wearing black jeans and a leather jacket all the time. You know, and that time was kind of like, oh man, he's bad news. That guy's bad news.
Hardcore.
He was a great guy. He was a little bit older than me. I think he had a seizure disorder, but you know, he wore a helmet all over the place. So of course, at that time, what kind of helmet was it? It was a German war helmet because it was cool. Right. Yeah. So of course, now this poor guy, everybody knows him. Nobody knows him, but everybody knows him. And it was unfortunate. You know, small town, just like Cami was saying, you know, you run. It just runs. It runs and it runs and it runs. And I think that, like you were saying with your mom, it was easy to put that stuff in the bucket. And it's easy to sign off on that stuff. You know, you had good cops out there, you know, trying to, you know, find the problem out. And the other ones are like, you know what, that one's kind of hard. Let's just put it in this bucket.
Yeah.
And you know, there was at least 3 people that Kemi talked about that went to prison 18 years. You probably went in as, how old was that kid, Kemi, when they did this?
16, 17, so young
Can you
teenagers.
imagine?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, your whole life is gone. Your children, the
Mhm.
future children you could have had is gone. It's all taken from you because of people's
Exactly.
fear.
Yeah.
It is so ridiculous. So the fear, I think a lot of the fear came from the people who were very religious because
Mhm.
and not dissing anybody who is religious who watches the show or will watch the show, but I think fear is used a lot in religion as a control mechanism.
Yes.
And when you have these new um, Wicca and Middle Eastern religions coming over here or beliefs, and it's contrary to our our Baptist or Lutheran or Catholic or whoever you are, if it's contrary to those beliefs, then it must be bad. And I think that happens a lot. It doesn't happen with everybody, certainly, but it happens probably more than you think. And that's, boy, is that tough to get around,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Mud Lover, what did you have?
It was hard for me to find something that no one was covering, and it sounds like I'm going to do. There was a book called Michelle Remembers. It was released in 1980, and it covered the story of Michelle. Wow. Michelle Smith and her therapist, Lawrence Pazder. And they kind of feel that contributed to the whole, was like part of the start of the Satanic Panic. It was released in 1980, the day after Halloween. And it went over when she was 5. Well, let me backstep. So the therapist used this process known as recovered memory.
Yeah, that's sketchy.
That's
Mhm.
that's what it says. Yeah, so she saw him for 2 years, and he tapped into an incident that happened when she was 5. So what was written in the book was that her mother turned her over, gave her away to a cult when she was 5 for 14 months. She was held captive, tortured, abused. She said through these sessions that she witnessed a satanic orgy where a member was murdered. She said that she was buried alive and forced to kill kittens.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
They really took it to every level, didn't they?
Yeah. And they said
Wow.
that even though it's a nonfiction book, it read like a horror story.
Wow.
Yeah. And like, I don't know how she knows this, but on day 81, she said the devil appeared after they were doing a ritualistic ceremony. So, yeah.
There's a lot of weirdness with that memory technique. They can implant anything.
Mhm.
If you are highly suggestible, I am. When if a hypnotherapist says to me, like, 1, 2, 3, you're out, I'm out on 1. I'm just under. I'm just gone. And it's crazy. It's crazy. So if you are a person whose mind works that way and
Mhm.
they can do that to you, they can do anything to you. They
Wow.
can make you believe anything that and call it a memory. It's
That's
terrifying what
wild.
people can do.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
I've listened to some podcasts with Jess says you can become another person. And there was so apparently, I don't want to get this wrong, but the person who raised, was it Mike Tyson? Wasn't Mike Tyson adopted?
Yeah,
Or
I think he
yeah,
was.
Oh,
he
okay.
was the man who raised Mike Tyson was a hypnotist,
I didn't
and
know that.
he hypnotized him
Huh.
constantly to make him believe he was the world's best fighter. This is
Really?
it's a fascinating story, guys. And
Wow.
he became the world's best fighter
So he was like
because you could
hypnotized for
implant
success.
that belief. What's that, Kimmy?
So he was like hypnotized for success almost.
Yes,
Mhm.
but this gentleman that I listen to a lot, I follow him on. Am I allowed to say someone else's name? I guess I can't, right? I don't know. I follow this guy and I listen to everything he does. His name is Chase Hughes, and he teaches body language and interrogation techniques
Ooh.
for the military, right?
Mm.
And he was in the Navy, doing interrogation forever. He
Right,
teaches
Jess?
Amen, sister.
Yeah.
Amen, sister.
Yeah, actually, you can. I went to a hypnotherapist and lost a lot of weight because it didn't stay off. But anyway, yeah, anyway, he was talking about there's like 5 steps or 5 seconds or something like that. He can split someone's personality with that technique.
Wow.
He can
Mhm.
create a whole different persona for you for when you come out, and it's done. And it's scary.
And I'm not going to call bogus on any of that stuff. I know that I've been to hypnotherapy years and years ago. We were at a comedy show. It was me and my sister and I think my brother. And anyway, so this he's doing his comedy bit, and he says, well, does anybody want to be hypnotized? I'm like, heck yeah, I do. Right on. So he calls me up there, and he was going through his stuff, and I just, no, I couldn't do it. And I played along because why not? It was fun for me. He had me singing Elvis songs. I friggin' know every Elvis song. So I was singing Elvis songs. I don't know them well, but I played along. And then I went to a weight loss guy one time, and his thing was, once they hypnotize you, every time you see what you really like, think of it as the most disgusting thing you've ever seen. I worked on a pig farm, and I'm just gonna let that settle with you. So, he said, yeah, anytime you're gonna cheat, you're gonna go have candy or whatever, think of X. Yeah, apparently I like X because I ate the heck out of X, and yeah, it's so. I don't know, and maybe that guy is awesome. I can just tell you what my experience is, and my ADD is like,
I think there's probably a small percentage of the population like you, or they're not suggestible. They're not going to be, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Anyway, yeah. So that whole satanic thing with them, I read a little bit, my lover, on that woman's story, and it just alarm bells all over the place for me about how easy it is to implant those false memories. And that technique is spooky. And they do it a lot.
Yeah.
They do it a lot for different traumas, particularly any sexual traumas and stuff like that, right? And so and then they come out and they use that to go after somebody for something that happened 20 years ago. And it's like, if something actually did happen to you, yes, a person needs to be held accountable, but it's so easy to mess with people's minds. This whole satanic movement, though, I was really curious, Mad Max, and you were talking about when we discussed about doing the show about somebody that was in prison.
So there was a lot of weird stuff that was going on in Satanic Panic, and there was a guy. His name is Richard Munoz Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker.
Night Stalker.
That guy, I think he was destined from jump to go on a bad path. I mean, the kid, he was born in 1960, so that would have put him right in the middle of Satanic Panic. He went on a killing spree. He was, and I can't imagine being remembered. This is your life. This is what you did. But he's remembered from April 1984 to August 1985. He murdered 14 people. Did various break-ins with his crimes, usually taking place at dark. He would call his victims on the phone. And at that time, some of the older folks, Cammie, I know you don't, but we used to have these little things called micro cassette tapes. And you would actually put that into your answering machine. And I think Mudlover's mom probably still has hers. But this guy would call and he would leave these messages, and apparently they were just terrifying. He would call and it's interesting the way he evolved into this. He began developing interest in the macabre in his early mid-teens from his older cousin, who was a Vietnam War vet, with schizophrenia and PTSD. He and his cousin bragged about all his war crimes, all the stuff that he got away with when he was in Vietnam. Ramirez learned military skills from him and later employed during his killing sprees. He cultivated a strong interest in Satanism and of the occult. By the time he left home in Texas and moved to California, he was 22. He used a lot of drugs. Coke was his drug of choice. He committed burglaries to support his drug addiction, which was using murder or attempted murders, rapes. And that is this stellar individual. Apparently, when he was about 10 years old, he'd been smoking dope since he was 10. So he had all kinds of medical issues, and unfortunately, he was just going down a bad path right from when he was born. Some people are just born dealt a bad hand. In 1989, he was convicted of 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. He unfortunately he never recovered from that. He was sentenced to prison for life and didn't even get to live out any of his sentence because he died of leukemia before his sentence was done. So, I don't try to say bad of anybody, right? I mean, I really don't. But like I said, I think this kid right from jump was screwed up. His dad was very violent. He was a very violent alcoholic. He was a laborer, and he would physical abuse against the household. Richard Ramirez, and it's funny because he was brought up Catholic. He came from a very strong Catholic parents. And the funny thing about it is, you said just a few minutes ago when you were talking about little bits of religion that it's a fear thing. So I don't know if he pushed back because of his Catholicism, or I mean, I don't know his whole background. like I said, he started smoking marijuana when he was 10. So and like I said, I don't feel bad for the guy. I feel bad for the guy, but I don't feel bad for the guy
Right, sure.
because he
I
was
mean,
dealt that crappy hand from jump.
yeah, but a lot of people are dealt crappy hands and they don't murder people and they don't
Right,
terrorize the
Right.
exactly.
community and they don't. And I've watched interviews with this guy afterwards, after he was convicted, and he was pretty intelligent.
Yeah, he wasn't
You
stupid.
know,
He They said
what
that
was he?
he was. Go ahead.
I was going to ask, what was he like inside? Do you know?
I don't. I know that he was once he was in prison, and he was he wasn't that bad of an inmate. He
Not really.
he just once he started programming, he just it you kind of get to this thing, and I think people like this, and I don't know. I have never done this kind of research, but I have seen people before and after. And once he was told what to do and told when to do it, he programmed very well. They said he wasn't a problem child. Once he got into prison, it was all this running amok that he did when
Yeah.
he was doing his thing. It's funny as I'm looking over my notes here, when his dad would go off on the family, Richard would run to and sleep in a cemetery because he was
Oh,
comfortable there.
wow.
His father often
Well,
tie
it's
a
quiet.
crucifix in, it is quiet. It's, my mom used to say that a cemetery at night is probably the safest place to be. Now, I can remember when I was a kid going to a cemetery, and my mom, it'd be getting dark, and I'd look up, and I really hope that those were people walking around. I really hope, because I saw stuff, and so, but that's, just that's how I'm me. But he took a job at a Holiday Inn and used his master key to rob people. So he wasn't stupid.
Right.
He knew how to make things happen. He began to meld his sexual fantasies with graphic violence. So, and that satanic panic time, that's what they were talking about. That was what they moved into. And like we talked about earlier, they would say, well, if it's a rumor, well, by God, so and so did it. So he's learning about this stuff. He molested some kids in an elevator, but it was never reported. The kids didn't report it. His employment ended abruptly after he attempted to rape a woman in her motel room and was caught in the act by the victim's husband. Now, right there,
Yeah.
I'll just say they could never rent that room again if that was me. I'm just gonna let you run with that. But again, although the husband beat Ramirez at the scene, criminal charges were dropped when the couple who lived out of state did not want to come back and testify against him.
Wow.
And I remember that when I was reading up on him a couple of years ago, and they could have had him right then and there and prevented all of those murders.
Wow.
It's really something. So do you think his really strict Catholic upbringing, I mean, I think he was already warped anyway, but I think this whole panic movement out there, he was able to use it to his advantage. He was an intelligent guy, and he probably thought, well,
think about this. He was one of those guys that, everybody knew him, but they didn't know him.
Mm-hmm.
He was put in that bucket with everybody else. And once he would move to a new area, nobody knew him because we don't have the online. We don't have any of this communication type stuff.
Right.
And when we, it was like, oh, did you hear about so and so? Did you hear about so and so? Oh, and by the time that was done, it was, so and so was gone. But now it's instantaneous. I can call you from where I'm working. I can call whoever. It's incredible the strides that we've taken. But back then, we didn't have that.
Mhm.
So like Cammie was saying, we didn't have that point to talk to everybody. It was room meal and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't know. The problem with him is, like I said, I think he was dealt a bad hand. He committed his first murder in 1984 of a 9-year-old girl, and it was in the basement of their apartment in San Francisco.
He was 24.
Yeah,
he was born in
so
60. Wow.
Yeah, he was in 60. So he once they were in the basement, he beat them, strangled, and hurt the little girl, and then he hung her by her blouse on a pipe. So this guy, this whole satanic, he was in it. I can't imagine.
Do you think? So we have. I mean, there is like I think they call it the Church of Satan, which to me is kind of interesting because that they put church on there. You know what I'm saying? I think they just do that to rile people up. And, people are free to believe whatever they want to believe. And I know that there are people out there that I personally know who follow that path, and they're good people. I mean, the people just feel that they put labels on everything. Like you said, the buckets. And he was smart enough to be able to use everybody's fear to his advantage. He was a terrifying individual, but then you look at, I was talking about him earlier, right? Helter Skelter. You look at Charles Manson, and that whole crew. He was truly evil. He was truly evil. I mean, I've read a lot on that whole movement of his and the crimes that they were committing before the Tate murders, that, the crimes that they were committing out in the desert, like in that compound or that whatever, the compound that they had, right? Because they'd have
Spawn Ranch.
Yes, that's right. And they were talking. One of the books that I read on it was not a fictional book. It was based on fact of everything researched and interviews with police officers and everything else. And they truly believe there were quite a number of backpackers and innocent people who just happened to wander onto that ranch, and the movement was somewhat glorified in the press because he didn't know the violent aspect of it. And so people were like, oh, it's just this movement where it's peace and love. No, it wasn't. It wasn't at all. People got in there and he didn't want the competition from these guys, and they just failed. So there's probably a lot of people out there.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that because a little bit about my background. I was in law enforcement for a long time. And when you go through the hiring process, there's a process that you got to go through the application. You got to go through this. Well, the last thing that I had to go through was my psychological appointment with a psych doc. And I know.
And mind blowing, right?
It was friggin' nuts. But the doctor had an 8x10 glossy of Charles Manson's booking photo right above his desk.
Wow.
And after my interview was done, I said, can I ask you a question? I go, is that Charles Manson? He goes, yeah. And he says, and we've kind of scattered right now, but he said that Charles Manson was one of the most intelligent men that he ever spoke to. He ever interviewed. Charles Manson would actually, he didn't do anything.
No, he
He
didn't. He
didn't
was
do
well,
any.
they think he did though. Out at the
I think in the
ranch.
beginning. I think in the
They think
beginning.
he was the guy who was probably taking care of some of these backpackers coming through. And
Yeah.
then he started
Mm.
learning how to make people do things.
I mean,
And he manipulated people.
to be able to manipulate so well.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah, that's
you
the one
don't.
thing
Yeah.
all these cult leaders have in common, right? They're
Hmm.
incredible narcissists, but they're really, really good at manipulating people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
And
scary.
Yeah.
once you find that, um, if you can actually work that, look at. I mean, I've been to a lot of training, and they've talked about command presence, and when you come on scene, as soon as you get there, and then there's an aspect of motivational speaking in there, because you take a scene over, you do this, you do that. They would use Charles Manson as part of the training. They would use Hitler because Hitler was able to get all these people on the same page. Can you imagine
Mm-hmm.
what kind of a motivational speaker? Because then you get to the point where I imagine with Manson's folks, right? You had a core and they might have seen him do bad things.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, you get to that aspect of, well, yeah, that's cool. I feel about that. And, going back to that group, there were misfits. Unfortunately, there were misfits.
Yeah.
And easy to, like Cammie said, easy to manipulate. And he probably, he probably had plenty of dope, and it's easy to push those people. It's those low IQ people pushing them that way. And
Well,
then,
look, it wasn't it Brian Wilson that was making music with Manson for a while? Brian
yeah,
Wilson.
he did.
Well,
Well,
did they make a
I
song together? Or they
I
were
think they
using
did.
Manson's? Yeah, it's mind blowing to me. He had so much power over people when they met him.
Mhm.
And then my ex, way back when boyfriend, ended up being a guard for Manson. And he said that they would rotate these guys in and out every couple of weeks. Like they would have a guard for Manson because he would play so many mind
Mhm.
manipulative games on people that they had to 2 weeks max, and then they'd bring in a different guard because he was just so manipulative that he was playing mind games and he never stopped talking. He
And
just never
that's what they said.
Wow.
That's part
Yeah.
of their psychological evaluation of him was that he would and he would talk and talk and now I can talk a lot, but he would notice details about people. He would notice, especially a guard. You got as when you're in jail, think about it. I tell you what time to get up. I tell you what time to go to bed. I tell you when to change your clothes. I tell you when to eat. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
You've got 24 hours to watch my mannerisms.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working a 12-hour shift. You have 12 hours to see what I do. You have 24 hours a day to see what staff does, And I can almost guarantee you that if Richard Ramirez would have fallen back and found a group, he could have been a force to be reckoned with.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Oh man,
he
can you imagine?
I can't imagine this dude. I mean, and he did some just horrific, terrifying stuff. He broke into a 79-year-old lady's house, and he stabbed her repeatedly in the head and the neck and the chest. He cut her throat so bad that he almost cut her head off.
Yeah, he was so full of rage, and you got to wonder where that comes from. I mean, is it Satan? You know what I'm saying? I mean, is it where's that come from? That's a part of. I mean, that's not human. That's not human.
No.
You can't be human to be like that.
Yeah.
And then for me to be a model prisoner, that's just bizarre. It's
Well, you know, that just goes to tell you, he could turn it on and he could turn it off,
yeah, that's true. And
right?
women following him. I mean, women were writing to him all the time. They thought he was I'm like, "Ooh, did
It's
you
crazy
ever see
because
him
when he
smile?
smiled, he was like, not those teeth were bad.
It was
I know,
bad.
right? He had
It
those.
was
He had
bad.
those summer teeth. You know what
Yeah.
summer teeth are? Some are
Scary.
going this way, some are going the other way.
And they're water.
But he was gregarious. He could, and you'll find if you ever do a lot of research, you know, you talked about women in prison. There's women out there that they could save him.
Yeah,
They could.
they could change
Charles
him.
Manson,
They make
same
him better.
thing.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
There were other people that that I personally dealt with. I dealt with a guy, a couple guys, and they were shot callers, and I remember we'd move in certain classifications. You move them by themselves, right? You know, if they're a target or if they're in segregation or whatever, you move that person by themselves. And this one guy, I will never forget this guy. I would be working central control, and he would walk up to the door, and he would watch me through the window. He knew where he was going, but he was, I mean, his eyes were on me the whole time. And you're told, I'm not going to break stare with this guy, so I'd stare right back at him. But you're told to, you know, you discount any kind of feeling, you know, you're not the judge, you're not the jury. You move this guy, but these guys are looking into your friggin' soul.
Yeah.
Guarantee you, like I said, if Ramirez could have got more people, he would have been a force to be reckoned with. I think that once we came into the time that he was being a knucklehead, I think law enforcement kind of had their act together a little bit better versus Manson, you know, some other folks.
Mm-hmm.
The funny thing about him is he actually, when he got arrested the last time, and I remember this, he got so brazen that he stepped up to some woman's house and was watching her, right? And it was like the middle of the day or afternoon or something, and he was down in a very, very compacted area, and he tried to run, and a bunch of guys ran after him.
Sure did.
And I guess they almost beat him to death.
Yep.
And, you know, that's, you know, unfortunately or fortunately, he didn't, you know, but he didn't have to pay for his sins. Or maybe he's still paying for his sins. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? We don't know. Yeah. I mean, somebody like that, you would hope that they're paying, right? I wanted to take this away a little bit from Ramirez, and the last little part here that we talk about is an interesting link of the satanic panic movement to cattle mutilations. So, yeah, I did a podcast on cattle mutilations because it was a really interesting. Well, the whole phenomenon is really interesting to me, and it's not over. It still goes on, but it's not reported like they were. I remember the Inquirer had them in I don't even know if the Inquirer's still around, but anyway, it was in the Inquirer, and it was in the Star, and it was in all this stuff, right?
Right.
It was, and not just cattle, but it was all livestock. It was horse, it was sheep, it was range livestock. Okay, and this was in the 70s, so that the satanic portion came into it. The first, cattle mutilations actually go back to the first recorded incident was in 1606 that I can find, believe it or not.
Wow.
It's been going on for a very long time, and it's not just the U.S., it's all over. But there was this whole rash of them, like in the 1970s, and I think there was as many as 8,000 that occurred just in the state of Colorado alone. And rightfully so, officials, you know, ranchers, cops, state ag people, everybody was trying to figure out what in the world is going on here. And it's interesting, and some of them looked like they had been picked up by helicopters and then dropped. It was just fascinating what was going on. Poor things, you know. But there was a prisoner. Let me get to his information here. So the farmers are starting to really they want law enforcement to do something about this, right? But nobody really knows what's happening. And so in 74, it was in December of 74, along with all these cattle mutilations, there was UFO sightings going hand in hand. So wherever the UFO sighting was, they had cattle mutilation. So they were trying to figure out, like, is this like aliens studying cattle? I mean, like, what's going on? Because of the precision is a word. Precision. Find a word.
Anyway.
Surgical,
like the
taking organs and skin and things like that was happening. I mean, scalpel precise, right? So they're like, well, what's going on? So there you have this prisoner. He's a federal prisoner, and his name is Bankston, and he came forward because they're hearing news in prison and stuff like that. There's TVs, right? I'm assuming that there's still TVs there. And he comes forward and he says, look, I have some information on this. I have information on this, and he provides all this information on the Satanic Motorcycle Club that's responsible for all these mutilations. We're taking interest in this because he's talking some details here. And they spent a long time trying to chase down all of these leads. But then they find out the only reason why he's talking to investigators is because they're taking him out of his cell, and he's trying to come up with an escape plan.
Oh.
Yeah.
So maybe.
So no, Satan, however, years later, there's this college kid in Kilgore, Texas, and he does this paper for an essay paper. And he alleges that he has sources and contacts and all this stuff on this story that Bankston had spun on this satanic motorcycle group, that they're responsible. And yet again, all the authorities rush in, started going to these motorcycle clubs and everything else, trying to figure out, who's the Satan worshipers and who's killing on the cattle. And they spend all of this time and all this energy and all this money, and it was nothing. It was fabricated. And it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. It's you talk about that. And what did Cammie talk about? What did Cammie just say? Manipulation, right? Yeah. This guy was actually, and I've heard this case. He was actually smart enough to figure out how to jerk these guys' chain. So it goes back to the manipulation, number one. Number two, well, if you're a detective, right, and you have a bunch of unsolved things, and this guy he's copping to everything. Oh man, do you have any files you could close?
Yeah, you should look like man.
Exactly. You talked about surgical precision. I think that was the word you were trying to bring out. There were when they found these, surgical precision. When they found these predominantly cattle, they would say that the cuts were so clean, and there were only certain areas that they would take, right? So they take an eyeball, they take an ear, they might take a tongue, they would take the genitals, and they would take the anus. But when they would cut, and tails, but when they would cut these, there was no blood.
No blood and no predation of the bodies afterwards, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah, exactly. These guys would say stuff like, well, and we're completely off topic, but when they would say that they would find these animals versus an animal that's been taken down by a bear or coyotes or wolf or whatever, within a day, it's a buffet, right? The
Right.
birds are taking
Everything's
them,
there.
the ants are
Yeah.
taking them,
Yeah.
other wildlife's coming in to get them. But these specific animals were not touched. They would rot. And it's amazing to me.
I mean, we've gone all around, but we come back to the satanic panic. There's never been any proof that anybody who ever worshipped Satan did any of these nefarious things, right?
Right.
There hasn't been any documented proof. And people have used the name of Satan worship to commit horrendous acts. But when they are researched, when people go back, an investigator goes back, and I remember there was a teenager I want to say it was somewhere in Pennsylvania, who's he was into he was a nice looking kid, but he was on the creepy side. I mean, not this goth, but this kid took it to the extreme, and he had a girlfriend. I think the girlfriend lived with the grandparents, and grandparents didn't. Huh?
Is this the vampire guy?
No.
Hmm.
I do know that case, and we should do that case tonight. But no, he wanted to date the girlfriend. The girlfriend's grandparents didn't want this kid around, so he and her take grandparents out. And when they were finally arrested, it was Satan made me do it. I've been worshiping Satan all this time. And then they go back and go, no, you're just goth and weird. There was no substance there. There was no journals. There was no anybody else who saw him do anything. There was, you know what I mean? He was just a bad guy.
Yeah. What's funny that you said, well, that's the bad part about it. I used to listen to a guy, Midnight in the Desert. His name was Art Bell. Yes. And Art Bell had a way, he would have people come on his show. And one time he had a follower of the devil, of Satan. And this lady had said that she had committed her life to Satan. At one time, she was so devoted to Satan that her son, her 6-month-old son, was killed by her ex or whatever, and the term that she used was the M word, and that she presented this child to the devil, and she wanted him to be a priest of the devil. Now, you think that these kind of people are like, they couldn't fall, they couldn't hit water if they fell out of a boat. This one was very articulate. She was very smart. She knew how to speak. And, you go back to Manson, you go back to any of those people, they knew how to speak. If Richard Ramirez was able to get his, a group of minions.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that. I mean, you talk about, like I said, look at Hitler. Hitler he was such a motivator. He came from nothing.
Right.
And he took over a whole friggin' country, then invaded a bunch of other countries.
I know, almost could have won.
And I mean, it was one of those things where there were certain things where if it would have went one way or the other, it would have been a whole different thing. But it's interesting. I think that going back to the whole satanic panic thing, I think it was like we talked about. It was easier for these people to put something in a bucket. You could put all this it's this or it's that, or by the end of this, we were so desensitized, right?
Yeah.
It was one of those things where it's just satanic panic. It's just that it's just Bob's howling at the moon again, and we're desensitized to that point. So it's interesting, very interesting stuff.
Really interesting stuff. And don't let people manipulate you out there, gang.
No.
Don't fall into that path, because people, when they can manipulate, they will manipulate everybody. And it's really, if you find yourself like swaying to something, step back and
Regroup.
and regroup, find that inner voice, because these people are not out there to do good deeds.
No.
None
And
of them
it's
have. None of them have.
no. And it's the
So-
funny thing about it is they're such that to hearken an old world, they're charlatans. They're a wolf in sheep's clothing. They're great salespeople. But you know, when I get in trouble with those people, I just sick mud lover on them.
Now, she's mean. Yeah. All right, guys, thanks for hanging out with us tonight. We had a really good time on this topic. And I think it's a topic we can probably hit a few times because it's so good. But thank you, and catch you guys. Let's see. Thin Line, we record Monday night. Jess is on assignment. She won't be with us. She's gone tonight because she's doing some fun stuff. And so David and I will do the Thin Line, and then next Wednesday, of course, we have our live medium show. So we'll see you then, and we'll bring back another live show on Thursday. So thanks for tuning in, and we appreciate you, each and every one of you.
Have a great week, guys.
Absolutely. Thanks. Like and subscribe.